Hi everyone, my name is Mohsin Saeed. I am a faculty in the Department of Neurobiology and Developmental Sciences, and I am a member of the Human Structure teaching faculty. I hope you are coping well with the stress of the medical school and this new pandemic, the COVID 19. Although we love in person lectures and working with our students, but because of the COVID 19, we are forced to move most of our activity online and do them in a remote way. But we are still hoping for some in person lab activities, definitely with social distancing and limited in person interaction. Human structure is unique in a sense that, unlike any other M1 modules, it has a significant lab components, and our students spend time in the gross lab with the cadavers and learn anatomy from there. Anyway, we are all learning in this new situation. We are learning how to communicate with the students remotely and deliver the contents in a way which is effective and useful for the students. And in spite of all these limitations, we are committed to provide you with a high quality, useful, and pleasant learning experience in human structure module. I have my email and my cell phone, and in the title slide. So whenever you need any help, don't hesitate to email, call, or text, whichever is convenient for you. Whenever you need any help, if you need any live discussion or explanation, I would be happy to set up a Zoom meeting with you in consultation with Dr. Davis. So let's get started. So in this lecture, I will be talking about the muscles of the shoulder region. But as you will see, to understand the muscles attachment and the action, it's important for us to know the bones of that region and some important feature of those bones just to understand the attachment of the muscle and their actions. And one more thing I did is that I divided the content of this lecture in two smaller segments, which will be about 10 minutes each. I hope that will help you to keep focused. Actually, long videos sometime you may lose focus. So that was my hope. Let's see how it works. Let's start with the bones of the shoulder region. Now, before I zoom into the bones of the shoulder region, let's have a quick look at the human skeleton. This is the anterior view, and this is the posterior view of the whole skeleton. And one thing I want you to remember is that the cranium, the skull bones, and the vertebral column, the sternum, and the ribs, they form the axial skeleton. Okay, and the rest of the bones, which include the shoulder girdle and the upper limb bones, the pelvic girdle, and the lower limb bones, they form the appendicular skeleton. Okay, so two component again. Axial skeleton is composed of the cranium, the vertebral column, the sternum, and the ribs, and the rest of the skeleton is the appendicular skeleton. And our focus today will be on this area only. See, on the posterior view, you can see this is the shoulder region. This is the shoulder region in anterior view. Okay, so now let's zoom in. So now these are the bones that are the components of the shoulder region. There are three bones here. This bone is called clavicle. This one is scapula, and this is humerus. But we will not be dealing with the whole humerus in the shoulder region. As you can see, shoulder extend from here to here. So only the upper part or the proximal end of the humerus will be our point of interest in today's lecture. Now let's deal with the bones individually. So when you study individual bone, it is always a good idea to see the bone in relation to the skeleton or its relation to the other bone. That will make things relatively easy. Like for an example, this is the medial border and this is the lateral border. If you see the individual bone and if you don't hold it in the right position, then it will be very difficult. You may easily confuse the medial border, lateral border, superior border, all this. So but if you see the bone in relation to the skeleton and in relation to the other bones, it's much easier, relatively easy. Now, the important feature of the scapula include three angles. Okay, look at here. This is the superior angle. Here you can see the superior angle here, and this is the inferior angle, and this is the lateral angle. Look at here. This is the lateral angle. Okay, these are three angles, and then this bone has three borders. And so this one, if you see here, it's easy. So this is the medial border, this is the lateral border, and this is the superior border. Okay, so and then it has three processes. You can see on the posterior aspect, you can see one process very easily. This is the spinous process or spine of the scapula. The spine is expanded on the lateral direction to give rise to another process called the acromion. And on the anterior view, you can see clearly this is another process here. It is called the coracoid process. Okay, so three processes and two surfaces of the scapula on the posterior aspect, posterior surface, and the anterior surface or costal surface. Okay, again, the posterior surface is subdivided into two areas by the spine. The area above the spine we call supraspinous fossa, and the area below the spine we call infraspinous fossa. And there is one fossa in case of, and the costal surface or anterior surface, we call it subscapular fossa. Okay, so subscapular, this one. Oh my. So this is the subscapular fossa. Okay, so those are the important features. And on the lateral side, you have the glenoid cavity here that articulates the humerus to form the shoulder joint. Now let's look at the next bone, the clavicle. Clavicle is a smaller bone. You see it has a gentle S-shaped curvature. And again, if you look at in relation to the other bones and on the skeleton, you see it has two ends. This ends as it articulates with the sternum or the manubrium of the sternum. We call it sternal end. This other end articulates with the acromion of the scapula, and because of its articulation, the acromial end of the scapula, we call it acromial end. Okay, now here you can see sternal end. It is acromial end. Difficult to differentiate when you are looking at the individual bones. It's always easy, much easy to see it here. Now look at this junction here. This junction between the clavicle and the sternum, the sternoclavicular joint. This is the only joint between the axial skeleton and the appendicular skeleton, because these are all part of appendicular skeleton, right? So this joint is the only bony continuation between the trunk and the upper limb, or you can say between the axial skeleton and the appendicular skeleton. So this is an important information. Now another thing is that if you look at the position and the way this clavicle is placed, it serves as a strut. Okay, so and then from this, the free upper limb is hanging from this strut. Okay, so one important, this is important because of this the presence of the clavicle as a strut. It keeps the upper limb away from the trunk, so that allow free movement of the upper limb. Okay, and another important feature of clavicle is that if you feel clavicle on your own body, you see it is palpable throughout its whole length, and it's a subcutaneous. Okay, now because this is the only bony communication between the upper limb and the trunk, or upper limb and the axial skeleton, any impact in the upper limb, traumatic impact, will transmit to the trunk or to the axial skeleton through the clavicle. Because of that, clavicle is the most commonly fractured bones, because as it transmits sometimes it can be direct fall on the shoulder, or sometimes it's indirectly any traumatic impact when it is transmitted from upper limb to the trunk. It travels through the clavicle and cause the clavicular fracture. And if you think of the clavicular fracture, the middle part of the clavicle is most vulnerable to the impact or fracture. If you divide the clavicle into three thirds, the medial third, the middle third, and the lateral third, the middle third of the clavicle is most vulnerable to fracture. Now the third bone is the proximal part of the humerus. Now, if you look at the features of the proximal end of the humerus, first thing you can see it's a circular, it's a spherical head of the humerus that articulates with this scapula to form the shoulder joint. We'll talk about shoulder joint in detail. And then you will see two big tubercles, actually the greater tubercle because of its bigger size and the lesser tubercle. In between these two tubercles, the depression here is called the intertubercular sulcus because this is sulcus present in between two tubercles. Okay, so that name makes sense, intertubercular sulcus. It has another name because a tendon of an important muscle called the biceps brachii, the long head of the biceps brachii tendon travels through this groove. That's why it is also called the bicipital groove. Okay, and the narrow area between the head and the tubercle is called the anatomical neck. Okay, and you can see the upper end, the proximal end. Proximal end is expanded, right? And between the expanded proximal end and this is the shaft of the humerus, the constricted area here is the surgical neck of the humerus. Okay. Now, one thing about surgical neck of the humerus is that if you look at the proximal end of the humerus, this area is much stronger than this area. Okay, the surgical neck is relatively weak in the proximal part of the humerus. That's why this is typically fracture occur in the humeral fracture occur in the surgical neck. Now, as we study the structures that are related closely to this area of the humerus, two important structures. One is a nerve called the axillary nerve and the artery called posterior circumflex humeral artery. These two structures are very closely related to the surgical neck of the humerus. And so whenever you see a fracture in the surgical neck of the humerus, the first thing that should come to your mind about the injury is the injury to the axillary nerve and posterior circumflex humeral artery. Even though this part is not the part of the proximal humerus, but one of the muscle of the shoulder region called the deltoid, the largest muscle in the shoulder region, will be attached here in the rough area on the lateral side of the humerus called the deltoid tuberosity. Okay, so I think that's all we need to know about the bones. Again, three bones are present in the shoulder region. They are the clavicle, the scapula, and the proximal humerus. And one thing I forgot to mention is that you see we say this is the upper border of the humerus, right? There is a notch in the upper border of the humerus which is converted into a tunnel by the presence of ligament on top of it. And when we talk about the structures moving in this area, nerves and vessels, so this area will be important. So again, the clavicle, scapula, and the proximal humerus, they are the bones of the shoulder region. And we talked about some of their features, and these features will help us understand the attachment of the muscle that is our main focus, the muscles of the shoulder region, that I will do in the next segment. So this is the end of this segment. Thank you.